Welcome to the Power and Beauty podcast, the show where we reveal the truths of how you can manifest inner beauty and personal power to live a life of purpose, success, and fulfillment. We take the time to look at the mindsets and practices that create health, wellness, prosperity, and satisfying relationships. We are on a mission to help everyone be the best version of themselves and actualize their potential.
Welcome to the Power and Beauty podcast. This is a show where we talk about how we can walk in personal power and how we can share our inner beauty such that it lights up our world. And we really would like to use this means to encourage everyone to live their best lives and to excel in their health and their well-being. And that is why we are doing what we're doing. So my name is Ike. Nene, I'm a family doctor.
And I'm Linda.
Yes. Linda is a teacher.
Sorry, I forgot that one.
No, that's fine.
Should have flown.
That's all right. Yeah. So we are here to essentially share nuggets as to how we can do better in life. Now,
today's guest is Irena, and Irena is an existential psychotherapist and life coach who has her own private practice, which she presents as the brand Embracing Our Choices. And today we will be talking with Irena on the area of life choices. Life choices. What can we do as against what we should do? So welcome, Irena, and we're really excited to have you on the Power and Beauty podcast. So I'm going to start with the first number one basic question, which is, we would like you to introduce yourself and tell us what you do, please.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's such a pleasure to meet you and to be able to reach your listeners. So let me tell you a little bit about myself, as you said. So I like to put it very simply. I help people address and hopefully solve, or to some extent, resolve their problems. And I've been doing this for 15 years. I've been a psychotherapist, a life coach, and a counsellor. And I know later on, at least I hope later on, I'll be able to address the distinctions between these three. But it is about helping people with problems. And I'd like to stress it's to do with daily problems. And I think Ike mentioned, it's about being the best we can be. And that's exactly it, being the best we can be on a daily basis. But sometimes we are kiboshed by anxiety, by depression, by stress. We try to achieve a work-life balance, but it's very, very difficult because life throws curveballs at us. And what a time to be talking about this, especially now. We don't know what's happening from day to day, what's around the corner. We now think we have a better idea, but it's still a very tough time. And so I help people make choices and find solutions when everything around them is unexpected and frankly difficult.
Yeah, thank you for that.
all right. Right. So what would you say is it that drew you to this kind of work? I mean, what was the pull that made you become a therapist and life coach?
I've always been interested in people. And I've been thinking recently, why was that? And I suddenly thought, actually, it was my grandmother. When I was growing up in Prague, my mum was working and my grandma had retired, and we were all living together in one apartment. There was a housing shortage. And so I was with my grandmother all the time. And I remember as a little child noticing that as we were walking around shopping, or if we went to our little country cottage on the bus, my grandmother would chat to people. And I would say, Grandma, did you know that lady? And she'd say, no. But she would start conversations and she would ask how they were. And life was tough under Czechoslovak communism. And she kind of made it her business to talk to the neighbors and to talk to people on the bus, find out how they were. And she liked giving people bits of advice, nothing too bossy. But she'd say, oh, you're having trouble with that. Well, maybe if you talk to such and such a lady, she might be able to help you. And that kind of stayed with me as the way to be when you're meeting people. And then the other aspect here, again, goes back to my childhood to do with my parents. I remember my mother always saying to me, oh, you can't plan your life. You just got to take what life gives you and then adapt to that. But my father was very different. My father would say, oh, no. You need to structure your life. You need to work out what you want to do and how you can work with other people and how you can address problems. And so if you think about it, these three parental figures kind of started my interest in psychotherapy because it's about talking to people, helping to give them pointers about issues in their life. And it's also about this big kind of dilemma. Do we try to plan our life? And maybe we run the risk of disappointment because, as I said a few minutes ago, life will suddenly throw something at us unexpected and our plans just go whoop. Or, do we do what my mother said, which is just take what comes? Or do we, as I try to encourage my clients, kind of try to take the middle road and have some plans, but also have contingencies, have ideas about how to deal with difficulties when they arise? So I guess really my interest started, to answer your question, Ike, when I was that 7-year-old girl on the bus with my grandma. Yeah.
It's quite interesting that you say that, because those are three distinct things there, and people tend to go by one of them or perhaps all of them. I don't know, but it's a topic that I might want to build on later on. But I'm glad you mentioned your parents and your grandmother when it came to actually giving you a picture of what your interests are and where you would like to go with that. But after that, having looked at all that and reflected upon that, did you always know you would be a psychotherapist? And what I'm basically asking, there are three aspects to this question. Did you always know you were going to become one that is a psychotherapist? And I'm also, and I'm sure our listeners would like to know more about your career evolution and how you made the transition. Because when I went on your website and I read thoroughly everything, and I know that you were, you work with the NHS, you worked for the NHS, apart from your private business, or private practice rather. So tell us more about, how you decided to become a psychotherapist and your career evolution and how you made the transition, please.
Absolutely. It's interesting you use the word transition because my career has seen several transitions. No, I did not know straight away that I would be a psychotherapist. I know some of my peers, went to uni at 18 and did psychology, and then they developed a counseling psychotherapy aspect, and that's what they've been doing for 30 years or so. I did not do this simply because when we came to this country, as I mentioned, as immigrants, my parents were very focused on what would be a practical career for their eldest daughter, which was me. And they said, let's see, what can we decide she will do? Because it was very much that kind of thinking. Parents decided for their children in our culture. And they said, oh, she's not very good at sciences, so she's not going to be a doctor. She's not very good at figures, so she's not going to be an accountant. Oh, law's a good one. And a cousin of my father's back in Czechoslovakia, she was a lawyer. So my father said, I think law would be very good. And that is what I did. And I then went on to practice law, and I worked as a commercial lawyer for 15 years. But the thing I noticed was that I enjoyed working with people, which is what you do as a lawyer, but I didn't so much enjoy the legal documents and the legal procedures. And then I've mentioned Czechoslovakia several times. The Iron Curtain came down, as you know, in the very, very late 1980s. And I thought, well, I wonder if I could use my legal expertise to actually live in my country of birth. And I saw that there were openings for development banking. And I had been working with bankers and, as I said, commercial corporates, and so I had a lot of useful background. And so my first transition was from the law to being in development banking. And I moved back to Prague for 3 years, and I became the representative for Britain at the European Bank there. And I really enjoyed it. It was amazing to see my country of birth change from the old block system to a new Western system, and to be involved, you know, at the coalface, if you like. But I kind of knew I didn't want to return there for good. London has always been my home. And I thought, when I return to London, I don't want to go back to the law, but I would like to carry on working with problem solving, but more on that psychological plane. And I thought, well, what would help me do that? I thought about psychology, but that involved more academic study of human behavior, while psychotherapy was already even in the early years of training, and the training is quite long, 5 to 7 years. But even in the early years, you're already working in placements and working with clients under heavy supervision. So, you know, the trained people watch what you're doing, but you're already working with clients. And that's when I started working for the NHS, which you mentioned, Linda. I did all my placements. I did a master's in psychotherapy, and for that you need 400 clinical hours, which is quite a long time. I mean, those of you in medicine, of course, have many more clinical hours, but we need 400. And I collected all of those working at 3 different GP surgeries in Southeast London. And so I got quite familiar with the NHS counselling programme, which I think is wonderful. I think is marvellous that can be offered to the general public. And I did that then as paid work also. I wanted to give something back to the NHS system. And so I became a lead counsellor at one of the Beckenham GP surgeries, where I worked with anything and everything that it's a practice of about 6 GPs, and they would refer clients to me with the problems I mentioned at the start of this conversation: anxiety, sleeplessness, chronic illness, difficult diagnoses that they were struggling to accept, or perhaps their children had an illness that they were trying to manage, this kind of thing. And I found that very, very, very rewarding. And then really alongside, I started developing my private practice. As you mentioned, I do have a brand, Embracing Our Choices, mostly because I want to emphasize that aspect of the work. So I thought, let's have a catchy title, something people will remember. This is what it's about, embracing our choices. That's how I came up with that brand. And I found that when I was at the NHS, quite a few clients would say, look, I know you can only work with me for 6 weeks because sadly, you know, funding restrictions, but do you know anybody who could work with me longer? And I wasn't allowed to, because if you work for the NHS, you can't mix the two. But I thought, well, perhaps if I set up my own practice, then other counsellors and practitioners in the field could refer to me, people who would like to spend a bit longer looking perhaps at deeper problems. And that's really how that developed. So At the moment, I'm mostly running my private practice because sadly, as we all know, we, certainly in London, we cannot physically enter GP surgeries. So it's very difficult to see your counsellor there. But I hope to return to my NHS work once that's back up and running, and do both private practice for clients who want to spend a bit longer than the 6 to 8 weeks, and the NHS work also to give something back to the system, which I think is very, very important. So those are my transitions.
Sorry, thank you. Before we're moving to the next question, I just, as a teacher, I just wondered if it's something you also provide for students.
I do provide counselling for students as long as they're over 18. In psychotherapy, we have a very strict rule that if you work with people under 18, you need specialist training for children and adolescents. And I don't have that training. I always thought I would focus on adults, which is what I've done. But once the young person is 18, I mean, it's, one of those arbitrary things, isn't it? We tend to see that as the age of majority. So once they're over 18, absolutely. And I do have quite a few clients in my private practice in their early 20s. And I'm sad to say that the COVID pandemic has brought many more people in their early 20s to my door, because they're dealing with the issues of how do I do my master's when suddenly I have to be online? And how do I make a career choice? I thought I was going on a graduate program, and that's been cancelled for the time being because of the pandemic. And how do I find a job? Some of them are and I do have a sliding scale of fees where I offer quite a substantial discount to students and to the unemployed, because of course they can't afford private practice fees, the 100% fee. And I want to accommodate that, because students, young people, they are dealing with so many problems at the moment, as we all know.
Okay, thank you for that for our listeners. I'm sure some of them will be quite young, and parents who have minors under 18.
Okay, right. So the name, Embracing Our Choices. I mean, it sounds so quite inspirational and really deep, if I could use that term. So, and I know you've kind of alluded a bit to the motivation, but then at the time you were setting up as a private practitioner, what would you say was the main motivation for, and I think you've shared a bit of it already, but could you just share a bit more as to your main motivation into going into private practice with that brand?
Absolutely. What I wanted to do at that point was really focus on clients who were going through life quite happily or quite okayish, the usual ups and downs, but nothing major. And then suddenly something major would hit them. Right. And that could be a very difficult career choice, perhaps, staying in the UK or moving abroad, leaving family behind. It could be a divorce that they didn't want. It could be sudden redundancy. It could be, once we were at a later stage in life, retirement, kind of enforced retirement. Yeah. And of course, it could be illness. And here we have the pandemic, one of the biggest things to have hit us, all of us, since the Second World War. And I wanted to specialize and help with that kind of problem where perhaps we are not, and I'm using the word we because it's not me and the clients over there. We all have to deal with this kind of thing. And what interested me was how to help people get their life back on track when everything suddenly, because of this major event that's hit them, feels like it's outside their control. Clients will use metaphors like, I felt like I was hit by a train, or suddenly it was like I was hit by a truck and I couldn't get up and I didn't know what to do. And so then you get this picture of someone who actually, a little bit like I said, my father approached their life along the lines of, well, I'm planning my life and I have a 5-year plan, and I would by the age of 25 like to have achieved this, and by the age of 30 achieved that. And they thought that was all going okay, and suddenly, bang, something has happened to throw all that up in the air. And the reason for embracing my choices as a motto, and then that became my brand, was that I wanted to help my clients understand that even when they have been run over by that truck or knocked down by that train, they can still make choices. In the worst possible scenario, the choice is to accept what has happened to them and how they will get up and carry on. But that's the worst scenario. Before you get to that stage, or let's hope you never do, but before that stage, there are many, many points where, because you've been knocked down by that awful life event, you may not see your choices, but they are there. And I help my clients identify them, name them, and then work out how they can deploy them, how they can use them to move on in their life. And the last thing I'd say on this point is that I was inspired, as so many of us are, in choosing this brand by a Chinese saying. I traveled on mainland China. When I stopped working in Czechoslovakia for the Development Bank, for the European Bank, I took time off to backpack. And one of the things I did, which, though I say so myself, I'm so proud of myself because it took a lot of courage. I'm not sure I'm very courageous. And this was a major challenge. I will travel in mainland China by myself without a structure, without a touring company. I'll just go. And I did that. And I met a PhD in one of the hostels that I stayed in, which wasn't really a hostel because they didn't really exist. But there was a PhD student from London. She was studying Chinese culture. And one of the things she said to me was, she said, I've come across this really interesting Chinese saying, which is something like this. When you make a choice, make it very, very carefully. Don't rush into it. But once you have made it, embrace it. And I thought, wow, because it said to me something like, so when you've made your choice, you then don't go on moaning and bitching about it.
Yeah.
You go, okay, I took my time making this choice. Well, the two parts to this, obviously. First of all, take your time. Don't rush into it. But once you've made it, own it. That's the other sort of motto, isn't it? But that's what this Chinese sage was saying. I'm hoping it was a woman, but you never know. This Chinese sage, hopefully she or he was saying, you took your time making it, you've made it, now don't bitch about it. And not just accept it, but actually embrace it. Embrace it and feel it fully and go with it. And just say that was my choice and that's the right thing for me. That doesn't mean you don't adapt it. Of course you do. But you embrace it as your choice. And I just love that. So when I was many years later, I was in mainland China, 20 years ago. So 17 years after that, when I was branding I had my private practice already, but I was at that point thinking about, maybe I could have a title or something that would be catchy. I remembered this saying that I heard in China, and I just thought I would love to call it that, embracing our choices. And I wanted to put embracing our choices, not embracing your choices, because it's all of us. It's not just my clients. All of us, I think, have to do this. Yeah.
I think that's really good, Irena, because when you talk about embracing, you're saying to the person, well, take ownership, take responsibility, isn't it? In that regard, that's powerful. Okay, I'm going to go to the next question. Could you explain the difference between therapy, counselling, and coaching? And also how these can be used together to help clients?
Absolutely. These terms are used a lot. And often it's only when clients actually come to me, they say, can you tell me what the difference is between psychotherapy and counselling? So I think it's important to define our terms so that clients know what they're doing.
Okay.
I would go first to counselling, and that I define as you're looking at the problems of the day-to-day, the things that we encounter on, if you like, I'm not trying to trivialize at all, quite the opposite, but encounter on the surface of our life every day. You know, when we wake up and we look at the day, a lot of the time things immediately come to us as, I'll have to deal with this, I'll have to deal with that. That's difficult. How do I deal with that? And so to give you an example, at the moment, working under the pandemic, a client might say, how do I work from home? Both of us are working at home. My husband has his study. I'll probably have to work at the kitchen table. How do I do that? And how do I couple that with, until March, homeschooling my 3 children? These are not insignificant problems. They are day-to-day problems. They're the sort of problems that counselling can very much help with. And there are plenty of other examples. Counselling can be used for light anxiety and depression. So, if a client finds that they get particularly anxious flying, not that we fly in airplanes at the moment very much, but, or driving, can't pass their driving test and they get very worked up about that. Counselling is very good for that. Or someone has problems losing weight. Again, it's not an insignificant problem. And it's day to day, 3 meals a day, and what do they do, and how do they tackle that? Counselling can help with that. Or I drink too much alcohol and I'll wake up feeling fuzzy in the morning, and that affects my work. Again, counselling can help with that. Therapy, it's very similar indeed. But it tends to be about more deep-seated problems, and often past events, either when one was younger or when one was a child, are relevant. In counselling, we typically work with the here and now. I get up in the morning, how do I combine home working and homeschooling? It's the here and now. Whilst in psychotherapy, we tend to start off talking to the client about how they were growing up. What was the emotional landscape? What were they taught to believe about themselves? Are they a valuable person, or are they someone who's only there to help others? And I mean that in a bad way. You're just an object to be deployed in the family for the use of others. That can obviously verge on areas of abuse. Yeah. Abuse is something one would handle in psychotherapy with a client, not in counselling, really. So to give an example here, so many of us, especially now, are battling with work-life balance. Yes. So if I have a client who is kind of managing it okay, but can't stop working at weekends, then perhaps counselling is appropriate for that. But if I have a client who says, I'm not managing work-life balance, and I'm working all evenings, and I'm now getting up at 5 a.m, and weekends, what are those? I work all weekend, all the time. That sounds quite extreme. Extreme anxiety is also in there somewhere, most probably. Yes. And I start asking them about their sense of their own value. And I will often hear, when I ask the question, why can't you stop working on Saturday morning? Well, I can't because of what my boss or my colleagues will think. And what will they think? That I'm not good enough. And then I need to work with them to unpack where that idea of not being good enough has come from. It might have come from last year's appraisal, where the boss said things that were not very praiseworthy. But more likely, in my experience, I find it comes from something that the client was told or that happened when they were growing up, when they were, doesn't even have to be schooling. It's often before that. You know, your brother is so clever and he does very well at school and you're rubbish. I mean, you know, sadly, some parents, very sadly, do say that or imply that to their children. And the child will then go through life feeling, even as an adult, that they're rubbish and that they need to work to show others that they are good enough. So when it's a problem like that, I would tend to say we can't really tackle that in 6 sessions. Counselling is often short term. Let's see how we go with the 6 sessions. But at the end of that, we'll have a review. We'll see how you're feeling. And perhaps we'll continue for 3 months or maybe even longer. Again, sometimes, as I said, therapy problems are because of abuse, either sort of minor abuse or serious abuse experienced in childhood or in adolescence. And that's when longer term therapy is more appropriate. But I need to stress here, it's always by agreement between me and my client. Yes. If my client wants to do 3 months, absolutely fine. That's how we will start. And at the end of the 3 months, I may recommend that we work further, but it's up to them. It's their choice, what they would like to do. And lastly, life coaching, it's a bit of a different animal. It's for people who feel that actually life is going fine or, you know, okay. But they would like a sounding board to work out further strategies and to implement tactics. So they may be coming along and saying, you know, I'm a very successful lawyer. I'm actually, or a doctor or a teacher. I'm actually doing very well. But I'm thinking in a year or so, because they're forward planning, that's why they're successful. In a year or so, I'm going to kind of get stuck because I might have to decide whether I'm going to stay in this law practice or in this hospital, or if I go abroad. And it's very difficult to decide, or perhaps at the moment not go abroad, but if I move to another employer. And I would like to work out what is best for me, but my spouse is sick and tired of hearing about this. I would like to come. Sometimes life coaching is fortnightly, it doesn't have to be weekly, because therapy counseling tends to be weekly because people are distressed, so you're there to support them. Life coaching could be fortnightly or even once a month, where the person, sometimes for an hour and a half, just to make it a bit longer. Therapy is usually an hour. But when you're working out strategies, hour and a half once a month, and I'll be the sounding board and you tell me your ideas about where you'd like your life, your career to continue. Doesn't have to be career. It can be planning your family. It can be planning whether you're going to move in with your extended family or whether you're going to carry on living as a nuclear family in a separate accommodation. It can be all sorts of things like that. But it tends to be more about planning things that are already working quite well. And you want to have a structure, and so there's a professional helping you put that in place. So that's life coaching. But often they will interweave, not so much for life coaching, but counseling and therapy. As I said, I may start saying, well, let's look at the day-to-day problems. Let's work together for 6 weeks. And then in the review, the client may say, well, actually, I need to talk a lot more about my childhood and what happened there. And then we kind of shift gears slightly into therapy, where we're looking at things in more detail and perhaps more depth. That's really the main difference. Yeah.
Well, that's really so important, I would say, because the issue of how we've had to evolve in our mind over the years is so crucial to who we are today, really. And I certainly understand that when you see an individual today, that individual is literally you could say the product of years of conditioning and years of, in many ways, experiences that they've had to deal with, and how they've responded to that, and how that's created their reality, and that's informed more choices. So at the end of the day, it's all about choices. It's all about experiences. And we know, I mean, the neuroscientists will certainly tell us that, the brain functioning is something that is constantly changing. I mean, neuroplasticity within the last, few decades, it's certainly an area that we've come to learn a bit more about, such that people know that, you can change how you are depending on what you experience. And obviously it's an ongoing process. So I wanted to ask the question, in terms of choices, because choices are so important, how can you figure out whether you're making a good choice or a bad choice in that moment? Because that's, I suppose, the way it boils down to what we do in the moment, isn't it?
Absolutely. And this is a very interesting question, I think, because it goes to what we define choice to be. Now, most of us, I would guess, think choices are the big choices. What job shall I do? Where shall I live? Whom shall I marry or live with? That kind of thing. And we perhaps conceptualize it by saying, well, you sort of build up to the choice, build up, you get information, this kind of thing, you chat to others. And then at a certain point, when you pick up the telephone or write that email, you make that choice. Now, in terms of your distinction about good choices and bad choices, I think it's very helpful to conceptualize choice rather differently, and to see, as you were mentioning neuroscientists, like I read somewhere recently in an article about this for professionals, that neuroscience tells us that in a given day we make on average 150,000 choices. And that kind of blew my mind, because I thought, wow, and I've always thought in terms of lots and lots of little choices making up our day and building that big decision. But I didn't realize it was as many as 150,000 a day. 150,000 a day, that's a lot. But that idea helps me look at what I'm doing when I make a big decision, not as a live and die moment where I press the trigger and it's either good or it's bad, at the risk of using a sort of military weapon-like analogy. Because if you think that you've, in an average day, are making 150,000 choices, your decision is an accretion of lots and lots and lots of little choices. So if you take the question of, shall I accept this new job or not? I was helping a client with that very recently. Shall I accept this new job or not? She said, I'm terrified because it's kind of 2 grades above my current grade. and it's in a new organization, and I don't know that I'm up to it. And I'm terrified of making the wrong decision. And what we then did together was we dismantled her process of decision making. She was visualizing that Tuesday, which was the deadline for acceptance, she would be making that decision. And I helped her see that she has actually already been making the decision in these little tiny steps, which included talking to her father about it, included reading the job description, included talking to me, including the moments of panic when she's sitting in her sitting room thinking, I'm not good enough for this kind of thing. And then when she actually wrote the email saying, yes, I would like this job, that was the result of that. That wasn't the moment of decision. And in the same way, to answer your question directly now, in the same way, I would say that when we make that decision, that choice, we actually don't know whether it's a good choice or a bad choice. But from that moment, from the moment she wrote the email saying, yes, please, I would like to accept this position, we then start monitoring tiny bit by tiny bit, the consequences. And that's when we begin to realize whether it was good or whether it was bad. I hesitate to use that phrase, whether it was bad. I would say more whether it's verging towards perhaps a problematic situation. And there, because again, we can make that post-decision period divide up into moments, momentary choices, we can start adjusting and tweaking. So if our instincts are telling us, oh, this is going well, then fine, we just carry on. But if our instincts are telling us, I thought this was going to be good, but I'm moving into a problematic area, well, let's identify those tiny bits. And let's try and tweak each one. And this is painstaking, detailed work, but that's what existential psychotherapy does. Very detailed work where I will, with the client or in my life coaching, existential coaching is similar here. I'll be going, well, let's look at each tiny consequence of your decision. This is not a bad decision per se. There are elements. I say to my client, I bet you there are elements that are good. Let's really identify those and put those over here. And then let's look at the fragments that are bad, and we can tweak each fragment. And if we can't tweak it, we can make the choice to accept it. And we can either accept it for now, or if it's something where we think, actually, this is a given and it will always be a given, let's learn to live with it and accept it, for the duration of this project. And I find that when we break up the decision-making process that way into tiny fragmentary elements, we can really move away from this scary, very scary distinction between good and bad, because that sounds kind of irrevocable. And in therapy and life coaching, we're trying to get away from that notion. And it's often very successful, that way of working, I find.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's really a good insight into, you could say, the decision-making process, which is, it's not just a discrete moment, but it's a combination, almost like an amalgam, really, of yes, different little contributions.
Yeah, and it actually fits in well with the next question, because with the COVID pandemic, it's actually, and amongst other things, it's changed the mental health and well-being landscape, as we all know. So my question to you is, what approaches are helpful in dealing with stress at work? And have you seen patterns in the ways stress and psychological issues manifest in different professions from your experience with clients?
Yes, stress at work. So many of my clients are bringing that at the moment. And I mentioned particularly having a lot of new clients in their early 20s, because of course the workplace is new for them. And this is not the standard typical workplace situation that they heard about from their parents or their tutors or their older peers. So stress at work, huge issue at the moment. The pointers that I find are very helpful to clients, I suppose I would break them down to 4. I like to, as most of us do, talk in 3s, but here I think 4 are important. The first one, communicate. Communicate, communicate, communicate. You're not in the office with your boss where you can maybe catch a few words here and there. They can see, perhaps they can see you at your desk or in your work area, and they if they're a good lead manager, can say, oh, you seem very stressed. Can I talk with you maybe? They can't see you. On Zoom, it's hard to tell. I mean, I know with clients who are trying to be very expressive because they're there to communicate their feelings and difficulties, but it's much harder to see that online than if you're in the same room. So at work where people are very busy, your stress levels increasing and the difficulties you're having may not have been noticed. So it's very, very important to communicate and to be as open and honest with your lead managers and your peer team members as you can be. These days, the positive thing my clients report is that mental health is no longer an issue that is brushed under the carpet. Indeed, they're telling me everyone is talking about mental health. And so the phrase, this is not good for my mental health, people are beginning to understand that and welcome it. They don't go, shh, don't talk about that, which perhaps was the case, 5 years ago even. So communicate, communicate, communicate. So that would be my first pointer. My second pointer, and these are not easy, any of them, I know. That's why it's important to focus on them, to at least kind of give it a try, is to be very clear about your boundaries. First of all, to identify them for yourself. You'd be surprised, perhaps you're not with your lines of work, how many people struggle with identifying their own boundaries. And if you don't do it for yourself, it's very hard to communicate it to others. Identify them for yourself and then make them clear to your teammates, your team manager. Because if you show your boundaries clearly, you have a very strong chance of keeping your stress levels manageable. But if you don't, people will pile on the work, pile on the requests, pile on the emails. And making the boundaries clear is so important. And I often use the metaphor of a farmer with a new field. Clients will say, but I've worked here for a while. They know what I can manage and what I can't. Well, this is a new situation for everybody, what's happening at the moment. And so if you use the image of a farmer who's had a farm for a good few years, everybody knows his farm, but then he buys a new field. Unless he puts a fence around it, nobody will know where the boundary is. And people will carry on walking across it. Some of the young lads will drive across it in their Land Rovers. Ladies will picnic on it when he's trying to, and he will then get very stressed and worked up and angry and resentful. Now, all he needed to do was at the beginning, put a fence around it. And people know and people respect it. And then he doesn't need to get angry and resentful. So that's an image I often use. Is your fence clear enough? Do you need to put up a new fence? It's a new situation. True. Do you need to put up a new fence? So that's the second pointer. The third pointer is please take breaks. because your time breaks, you're on Zoom, you're working at home at your dining room table, you're working after supper because you've been homeschooling children, so you had to take time out in the afternoon, so you're going to make it up in the evening. You could just be working all the time. You need to take breaks. And if the breaks are a bit different to what we were used to before the pandemic, because before that we would have maybe a coffee break at midpoint of the morning, lunchtime, possibly a coffee break. I still remember the days when trolley ladies with tea trolleys used to come round, and you'd get your cup of tea and your 2 biscuits and you'd have your, 3 minutes or something. We don't have a structure like this anymore. So you need to build in your own breaks, I say to my clients. And if that means doing your Tai Chi in your own, kitchen exercises for 15 minutes at 10:45 in the morning, and that makes you more productive afterwards because your stress levels have come down, then do that and be open about it. Don't hide it, because that brings more stress. Say to your Zoom colleague, I'd love to have a Zoom meeting with you, but I'm doing my Tai Chi exercises for the next 20 minutes. Can we please schedule the Zoom meeting after that? And you'll find people respect that. People understand because they're going through the same thing, that it's important to calm yourself down at various points in the day. Give yourself time to breathe, just to look around, just to enter the present. Stress is often about either living in the future. Oh my God, how am I going to get this done? And oh my God, there's just too much stuff. And I use the phrase, oh my God, I know that's a strong image, but it becomes like that. People start praying to their own spiritual deity because they feel under so much pressure. Or it's living in the past. They were told you didn't do such a good job on that project. And so they feel, I'm sure they were told that in a slightly kinder way, but that's the message that's percolated through. And so they feel, I need to just work all hours to do well now. But calming yourself, getting into the present, that's why I mentioned something like Tai Chi or meditation. You can do that for 10 minutes, 5 minutes even. Getting into the present, saying to yourself, I'm in the here and now. I will now work with what's in front of me on that screen or in that document, can often help decrease stress levels. And the last and fourth point, this is something that I'm sure many of us battled with even before the pandemic. Learn to say no. And say it clearly. Say it clearly. I have clients who we do role plays together because they say, I don't know how to explain that I can't take on this other project. And I say, well, okay, let's have a role play. I'll be your lead manager and we'll have a conversation. And so we have the role play in the session. And then I say, so when are you going to say no to me? And my client will say, but I did. And I'll say, but okay, when was that? Can you tell me again? And they'll say, well, I started explaining that I'm very busy on the other project. And I'll say, but that's not saying no to the new project. And we work on saying no very clearly and expressly, which so many of us, I know I did when I was much younger, find very hard to do. And we kind of camouflage it. And then the person on the other end is confused, or they think you're actually saying yes. And then you have this dreadful miscommunication because they carry on expecting certain things from you. You're sensing that. You're thinking, but I said no. And that builds the stress.
Yeah.
So learning to say no clearly. So number one, communicate. Number two, make your boundaries clear. Identify them, put them up. Put up that new fence. Number three, take your time breaks. Do your Tai Chi, do your meditation. Sit in the sun in the garden for 5 minutes. And number four, learn to say no clearly so people understand that's what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, that's really good. I mean, really practical things that we can all implement. And certainly, as I can definitely relate to, all the things you've said, because certainly working in a busy NHS setting, there's always going to be more.
Yes.
There's always going to be more demands. There's going to be someone who needs something. And I suppose it's, what do they say? Matter flows to where there's the least resistance. And if you find that you're the person who has got the least resistance, then somehow it's as if the staff and the managers kind of find a way to kind of come to you because they know you're nice and accommodating, which I suppose is a good quality to have, but at times it can create a situation of stress and overwhelm when you discover that actually I seem to be doing more than other people, or I certainly haven't had the time and the space to manage my work better. So that's really practical. Can we just ask a question along the lines of, you've talked about choices, and I think that is something so fundamental to who we are, because you can put 10 people in a room and say, what would you do? And you're going to get maybe some people, maybe 2 or 3 people might do the same thing. The other, maybe 5 people might say, well, I'll never do that. And the other 3 people might say, well, maybe. So could you just give some general advice as to how we can make better decisions? It might be things like career choices. It might be things like deciding who we date or who we associate with. It might be where we live. So what are the basic kind of guidance that we need when we're making choices?
Yes. And it's interesting that decision making isn't only about career and how we make our way in the world professionally, but it can often be so difficult in our private lives. And I'm glad that you've highlighted that to do with dating, to do with our living together arrangements or marriage. Again, these are things that are very much on people's minds, especially at the moment where it's so difficult to have what we used to call a normal social life. And we're encountering people on the screen often. And also family decisions to do with the education of children, and also the care of our elderly relatives and parental figures, this kind of thing. Sometimes very, very difficult decisions indeed. So here I would say there are, again, 4 things. The first, and I cannot emphasize this sufficiently, really, is to trust your own instincts. And I am surprised at how many of my clients will come and say to me, I'm looking at, for example, how to take care of my elderly mother. Let's take that as an example. And I can't decide whether to try and suggest that she lives with my brother or she goes into a home, or actually I move her in with her. And my brother says this and my aunt says that. And I read in the paper such and such. And my daughter is very angry because she believes I should be doing something else altogether. And I don't hear what my client is thinking. And so I will then ask them, what do you think I should do, or you should do? And they stay in their head and they say, I don't know, I can't decide. That's why I'm talking about it here, because there's all this going on in my head. Yeah. And I say, well, and I here will work with the body, and I encourage I don't mean that I touch my clients' bodies, but not at all, that's not part of therapy or counseling, but I ask my clients to try and feel what's going on in their body for themselves. And this you can do outside the therapy or counseling session as well. And I encourage them to do it as they go through the week. Try, because when we're saying a sentence like, I'd like to send my mother to live with my brother, we'll be feeling something in our bodies as we say it. And that's really what I mean by trusting your own instincts. Instincts are typically not up here in one's head. They are in your body as a whole. So I might say to my client, just say the words, my mother will live with my brother, and see what's happening inside your body. And you might feel sick. And that's telling you something.
Yeah.
Or you might feel a huge, from your heart area here, huge feeling of relief.
Yeah.
That's telling you something. Now, that's not to say that that is the decision, but it's informing you of a feeling that, as Carl Jung, I'm not a Jungian, but I love what Carl Jung said here. He said, emotions and feelings are not pesky irritations that thwart us. They are indicators as to what is important to us. And I totally underline that here. So try to not just think about when you're trusting your own feelings, you don't just think about all the different ideas you're hearing. You really try to get in touch with your feelings about it. And that will give you a very good guide to whether this way of going in the decision is something that works for you or doesn't. So this first pointer, trusting your own feelings, very much about trusting your own instincts, very much about getting in touch with your feelings. And many of us push our feelings away. Or if we recognize a feeling, we then feel guilty on top of that, and the guilt overlays the feeling of relief. I will send my mother to live with my brother, and you feel huge relief, but guilt smacks you in the face and you lose sight of the relief. So let's unpack that and honor and recognize both the relief and the guilt, and then we can work with both. So that's the first pointer, trust your own instincts. The second pointer, much more of a mechanical exercise, but I swear by it. It's something that is fairly commonplace. I'm sure your listeners will be familiar with it. Draw up that pros and cons list. You take a piece of paper, divide it into two, and on left-hand column, you write down all the things that are going to be difficult if you decide to date that guy who you've had 3 Zoom conversations with. Write down everything that you think about that, feel about that. How is that going to work? Anything and everything that comes to mind. The key is to make it as detailed as possible, so that you've really got something to work with. And then in the right-hand column, write down all the bad stuff that you're envisaging here.
Identify this.
And if you like working out numbers, add it up, and it might be very simple. You might have 20 pros and 5 cons, and then your life is easy. The difficulty may come when you've got 20 cons and 3 pros, 23 pros. So you've got just, that few more pros. And then you can do the exercise where you put a value to each. That's why I say make it as detailed as possible. You put a value to each item. So you decide that, certain, for example, shall I date that guy? Physical characteristics are very important to you. So you will weight load each aspect of his physicality with 5. Career, whether he has a career or not, is not important to you. So items on the list that are relevant to work, you'll just load with a 1. And again, I help my clients do that in sessions. If they want to do it in the session with me, we can do it together. Or if they want to take it away as an exercise to do at home, they can then bring it next time and we'll look at the results. And sometimes if you put numbers next to qualities or the pros and cons, whatever they may be, you may get a surprise result. And then the important thing is to try and stick with the result.
Yes.
That often will help you come to the right conclusion. The third thing I would highlight here is the third pointer. You need to accept, when you're decision making, you need to accept risk.
Yeah.
Clients will say to me, but I just want it to be 100%. Well, it never is. And I do a lot of my counseling and psychotherapy can be educational, where, especially with the much younger clients, I will talk with them, for example, about risk and how. I don't tell them what to think. Far from it. I don't tell them what to think. I don't give them advice. I may give them exercises such as these, but I'm interested in what they think. And so I say to them, what do you think about risk and risk taking? What kind of a risk taker are you? And that's perhaps a question we need to work out first before you make that decision. And they sometimes surprise themselves, maybe especially younger people, they haven't really thought about that. And if they can figure out what kind of a risk taker they are, that helps them decide whatever it is that they're battling with. And in that, I will always bring in the notion of the worst possible scenario. What is the worst thing that can happen? Let's really strip it down here. So if it all goes wrong, let's paint that picture and really have a visual image of, okay, it's all gone wrong. You're in there. Tell me about it. Tell me what's happened. And let's see if that's okay, if that's acceptable, if that's a risk you can accept. If you can't, then we need to build in factors to the decision making that rules that option out altogether. But if you can see yourself accepting that worst scenario, then actually you'll be okay, whatever happens. And if that is the conclusion, then the decision is easier. And the reason why I say there are 4 pointers here, because normally I have these 3, but I want to build in that last one that we had in your previous question, learn to say no. Decision making, again, can often be, it's actually not a decision you're making, you're saying no to something. And this is where you go back to your own instincts. Deep down that you don't want to do it. So it's not the decision that's the problem. It's externalizing it and saying to that very nice person who perhaps you love or who is a great friend and who assumes that you will do it. A bit like you were saying, Ike, these jobs and tasks and projects gravitate to that nice, accommodating person, and they see you as that nice, accommodating person. So they don't expect you to say no. So learning to say no to the people we love, to the people we're friends with, to the boss we care about. That's a big part, actually. It's not decision making, but it's a very important tool when you're trying to communicate a decision. Absolutely.
That's really informative, actually. And I'm sure that many of our listeners would probably want to know more in time. So I'd like you, Irena, to tell us about your services and how people can be referred or get to see you if they need to and want to.
Absolutely. So prior to the pandemic, I saw people online already. So that's something I've done for several years. But I also saw people face to face. And I hope to be doing that again once it's safe and the government gives us the relevant go ahead. And hopefully that will be in June or perhaps later in the summer. So I see people face to face in a small consulting room that I have in central London on Tottenham Court Road. It's between Warren Street Tube Station and Gower Street Tube Station. So it's very, very easy to get to from the mainline stations. I think King's Cross and Euston are 10 minutes walk away. And as I say, I'm on the Tube network. So I see my clients there. If they would like to come to me face to face, very, very happy to do that. Also, clearly at the moment, 100%, I work online. That's something I think it's a slightly different work. I may need to ask my clients to describe more how they're feeling or how they feel in their body, because I can't see their body. I can't see their toe tapping, or I can't see that they're scrunched up in the chair, because all I see is their head and shoulders. But apart from that, I believe we don't have much data because we haven't been working online for that long. But from what I can see so far, I believe in the efficacy of online work. And I make sure that the platforms I use are encrypted. So Zoom is one, FaceTime is one, WhatsApp video is one, and even Skype. Some of my older clients perhaps don't like Zoom, but they're very happy on Skype. That's something they've been using for a while. And I'm registered with the UK Council for Psychotherapy, where we have very strict guidelines about online work and the platforms to use and how to ensure that it's all totally confidential and private. That's very, very important. So I'm very happy at the moment to take clients online. And as I say, later in the summer, I hope those of you who are in London or would like to come to London, because you're not that far away, to see you face to face in my consulting room. It's easy to contact me. I don't need a GP referral, although I'm very happy to take referrals from GPs, and indeed I do. But you can self-refer directly to me by email. Probably is the easiest for you, or by sending me a WhatsApp chat introduction. That's possible as well. I have a website where there's a booking page. So if you prefer to see my availability there, that's always kept up to date. You can have a look at I offer sessions first thing in the morning, evening, weekends, because I know many of you are working during the day. But if some of you prefer perhaps a lunchtime session or a session during the day, I offer that too. You can see my availability on my booking page. And the website, very simple, www.embracingourchoices.com. And my email address is also there. I'll mention it, but it's difficult to spell. So it's Irena, IRENA, at embracingourchoices.com. And that's set out on my website. And my website will also show you first of all, a photograph of me, which is helpful to have if you're approaching someone you don't know about personal things. I think it's good to see a photo. And there's a lot there about my experience and my work. And there are quite a few blogs now that I've put there about various ways of doing psychotherapy and various conditions like anxiety and depression that I try to help clients with. So I hope you find the website informative. But I would just say again, please don't hesitate to contact me directly, and we can have a chat on the phone once you've sent me your first email or WhatsApp chat request, and we can have a chat on the phone and I can answer your questions and we'll take it from there.
Thank you. So it's www.embracingourchoices.com.
That's correct.
That's really good. So it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you, Irena. But before we go, we're just going to go through a few what we call rapid fire questions.
Yeah, my favorite part.
Just so that people can know a bit more about you. And that's fine. So Linda, go ahead.
Yes. How would you describe yourself in 3 words?
3 words. Kind, compassionate, careful.
Okay. So tell us, Irena, what makes you happy?
Sunshine.
And what makes you angry or sad?
Injustice and the pandemic.
Yeah.
Could you tell us one person who inspires you or has had a significant impact on your life or career?
I'm going to choose two presidents who were both prisoners, because I find that just incredible, their steadfastness. Nelson Mandela and Václav Havel, who was the first Czechoslovak president in the current era.
Okay. Favorite TV show or musical?
Mamma Mia would be the musical. I love that.
Okay.
Makes me smile like something.
Yeah, it's just hilarious. Okay, name one place you like to visit or you visit a lot, a place that you like.
I love New Zealand, and my sister lives there, so I'm privileged to visit it quite a bit, and it's like paradise on earth.
Wow.
Oh, right, okay.
Some place to check out.
Yep. What do you do to relax in your downtime?
I go for long walks in the park. I love having long baths with lots of bubble bath and candles and a good book. I ruin many a good book.
Okay, that's great. And the last question is this, Irena, what's the top thing you would like to be known for or remembered? You know, if people mention your name, what would you like them to immediately kind of come to mind?
My work with clients, where I give them, I hope, a kind and compassionate space where they can be themselves. Yeah.
That's amazing. Irena, we are really appreciative of you appearing on the Power and Beauty podcast, and you've shared lots of nuggets, lots of value, and really appreciate that. Yes,
and I'm sure that our listeners would find most, if not all, you have shared this morning very, very useful, because I know that I have taken away some really important things for myself as an individual. And some of the things you talked about, like, you know, having the fence and the ladies coming to have a picnic if you don't put fences there. That actually happened. That's a real thing that happened. Oh yeah, that's why we were laughing. And we had to get, you know, signs up to say, this is private. This is a boundary. You just don't go across it. Yes, because one of them said to me, I didn't see any signs. It was like, oh, okay. So here we go. Practical. Yes, it is, you know, your information this morning has been very, very practical for us. Yes. So we are very grateful, and thank you for being on our show.
It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been delightful to meet you and to talk a bit about what I'm so passionate about.
All right. So we're going to say bye-bye, and bye for now.
Bye-bye. Thank you.